2015. My name is Mary Price, and I'll be your host for today's session, along with my partner in crime, Amy Shackelford, who's quickly running up to the front of the room. Here she comes. Amy's my graduate assistant and will be working with the program for this year. And today's session, we're going to do a bit of an overview of the mentor role, expectations, and reporting requirements. For those of you who are joining us remotely, there's a PowerPoint presentation that will accompany this session, and so hopefully it'll help you navigate. All right, thanks, Amy. Also, if you have any questions during the program, please don't hesitate to ask. We'll stop, we'll answer them as we go through. If you're piping in remotely, you can also ask questions. There should be a chat box in live stream, and Amy's going to be personing or manning that station for us, and will pose the questions to me up here in the front of the room. So there's several goals for today's session. The two most important ones are for those of you who've been anxiously awaiting to identify your students and complete your mentor of agreement. Well, the happy news today is that you'll be able to do that through this session. We'll actually give you direct access to the forms, and hopefully within this hour-and-a-half time format, you'll be able to complete them at that time, as well as review some program changes that have occurred. Contact information for myself and for Amy is listed on the slide here. We also have a program email that's office, SLOFFICESL, at iupui.edu. We recommend that that's a good email to use specifically around SLA-related questions. But if you need to contact either of us directly, you have our contact information before you. Additional administrative contacts for the SLA program include Leslie Sweet and Manzi Singh. Leslie handles a lot of the scholarship processing, so if you're wondering if your scholarship has actually made it to your student's bursar account or what might be holding it up, either your student scholar or you can contact Leslie. She can give you an update on that. Amy also has that information. Monsi's a great contact if you try to contact the center and you can't get through either to Amy or myself. She can provide you general background, and also if you're looking for the CSL logo because you want to reference that you've got support through the scholarship program and want to acknowledge CSL support, Monty can provide that as well. For those of you who haven't had a chance to visit the Center for Service and Learning in our new location, we're now located in Hine Hall, Suite 243. So we're across the street from Michigan in the old President's Suite in what's now the University Tower. And so we encourage you to stop by at your leisure to come and visit our new digs and see some of the additional resources we have available. There's been some big changes this year. As many of you know, OnCourse is going to be sunsetting here in the next 18 months or so. Much of our program interactions historically have been housed in OnCourse. We've had some challenges with that over time. And so for this year, we've opted to move everything online onto the CSL website. So it's really, really important. If you want a one-stop shop, a key entry point for everything related to this program, I highly recommend that you bookmark this page. So the CSL website has been completely redesigned. It can be very engaging, but sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to navigate. So if you bookmark this site, it'll get you directly to the home page for the Service Learning Assistant Scholarship Program. The other thing to note is that everything you need to get to, whether it's application information, eligibility information, reporting forms, orientation registration for you or for your scholars, access to information on professional development, it's all going to be accessible through these highlighted links off this index page. So it's really going to be a useful resource for you. We're looking into RSS feed options, so as we provide additional updates and resources, we can be able to push that out to all of you so you don't have to come look for it. So to see that coming sometime over the remainder of this academic year. For the first session, for those of you that are new to the program, just want to give you a little bit of a reminder, a setting, or a context for what the program goals are. For those of you that are returning mentors, and we have many of you, you may want to hit the fast forward button as I go through this, because for many of you it may be familiar. So one of the things to keep in mind about this program is while the scholarship dollars ultimately reside with the students, this really is a faculty and staff support program. And we encourage you to list this source of funding on your CV as a mode of internal funding. It should be counted that way. The awards are distributed on a competitive basis, right? They really are capacity building awards in a number of different ways. They're there to support the teaching and learning mission of the campus. They're there to focus on and support sustained and transformative civic and community engagement projects that contribute to community vitality, that contribute to community engagement, and promote health and well-being, right? So we're looking across teaching, research, and service. This shouldn't just be considered, these scholarships aren't just intended for service learning courses, nor are they only intended for public service projects. So if you're engaged in creative activity, partnership work, if there's something that has a community engagement focus and has a university community partnership element to it, this is a program that we would encourage you to encourage your colleagues to apply for as well. The scholarships cannot be used for independent student research or student-initiated service projects. This is about your projects, your work. Now, if there's a graduate student or an undergraduate student who ends up in the context of contributing to this project, if they find something that they're interested in and it ends up generating an honors thesis or a master's thesis or becomes built into their dissertation, that's fine. But the project, the solicitation for the award can't be specifically for that student's project. It needs to be linked to your work as a faculty or a staff member. The other thing that the scholarships cannot be used for is to cover travel costs for international service projects or study abroad. The scholarships are dispersed to the bursar account. If there's any remainder that's left over, i.e. the student doesn't owe any money, that money will go back to them. How they use that money is at their discretion. But the funds are specifically intended to offset the cost of attendance here at IUPUI. So that's an important distinction that sometimes people get caught up in. Any questions at this point? No? All right, we'll keep moving. All right, so expectations for faculty and staff mentors. So if this program is about supporting faculty and staff, why do you keep calling me a mentor? It's an important distinction, and the reason why we use the term mentor is because there's something kind of distinctive about doing community engaged work, right? The work around community engagement, if you're going to do it well and do it authentically, it's counter-normative. That means it goes against the grain of the normal way we tend to approach teaching, learning, research, scholarship, creative activity, right? There's something distinctive about it. And so many times we come to the academy, and our students included come to it with prior experiences about who the community is, what they can contribute, what research looks like, right? What teaching and learning looks like, who can be a co-educator. And so in the context of teaching and learning in a community engaged mode, this can prompt both really rich learning opportunities and relationship opportunities, building opportunities between you and the students, but it can also produce a bit of dissonance. And that dissonance is something we want to harness, but it's also something we want to draw your attention to, right? In many cases, the students are being brought into roles that they're not historically familiar with. Some of them may have come from a prior background of serving as a community liaison, but many may not have. They may not have any experience in peer education or being a project manager. And so what we really want to encourage you to attend to is figuring out, and based on your own approaches, how to create a safe space for them to come to you and kind of say, hey, I'm really interested in this, or hey, I'm really struggling with this. Can we figure this out? And one of the ways we want to encourage you to do that is, and we encourage the students to do that, is by seeking professional development opportunities that support the project that you've engaged them in, but also that kind of nurture the relationship we're hoping that you build with them. Things to note and things that we've seen is that students in these relationships may or may not admit their discomfort. They want to save face. They don't want to look like they're not capable and competent in your eyes. And so that safe space is really, really important. You investing in their time as civic professionals, right, and as future public scholars through this kind of coaching or mentoring model is really, really important. You know, it's part of deep learning, and we encourage you to support that. One of the things to note is that service learning assistants are not employees, right? It's complicated, right, because they're contributing something to a project. When we talk about the work of faculty, we talk about the work of staff, right? So they are engaged in some meaningful activity, right? And in our general jargon, we often refer to that as work. In the context of a scholarship program and in the context of the bursar's office, this is not work. this is scholarship. And I want to kind of explore with you, and again, the mentoring piece of this is part of that doorway of exploring this relationship and the learning associated with it as merit-based, right? Because the presumption behind all of the programs that the CSL offers is there's merit to service. There's merit to community engagement. And that is inherently tied to cycles of critical reflection on practice, right? So the contributions that the students are making to these projects are a gateway to critically reflective practice. And how that's facilitated is determined in part by the relationship you build with the student and the relationships the students may build with community partners. So there's actually a triad here potentially depending upon the structure of the program. There may be even more than a triad if you think about if there's a lot of peer interaction going on. So it could be student-to-student mentoring, community partner-to-student mentoring, faculty or staff to student mentoring. You know, it could be all of those things at any one time, right? The scholarships that are awarded to students, which you select, again, remember, it's the mentor who identifies the student, right? It's to reward and recognize the learning and skill development that occurs through the contributions that the students make to your projects, right? As a result of the intentional coaching and modeling, which we just discussed, as a result of the relationships. Community engagement in the context of higher ed is very much about this relationship building component. And then again, the critical reflection. The reflective piece has been restructured a bit this year. There's still formal reporting and analysis that the students will do and that we ask you to do, but much more of that is going to be filtered directly through the mentoring role. Instead of the students directly submitting to us, they're going to be submitting everything to you as a mentor, and then the mentors are asked to submit to us at the end of the award period. An important piece of this, and another kind of element of the counter-normative role of this, is then again, if we're talking about authentic practices of community engagement in the context of higher education, part of that is you as the mentor recognizing, identifying, naming, exploring, communicating your own discipline or field's approach to engagement. And that may prompt, even for yourself, some examination of prior assumptions. And that may be prompted by your partners in the community, it may be prompted by your student scholars, students enrolled in your class. It could come from a number of different directions. So this is another one of the reasons why we talk about faculty and staff learning as a component of the program, is that once you get into these projects and get into them deeply, they're usually co-learning experiences for everyone involved. But I think the challenge is we're all so stretched and have so many competing priorities that actually making structured time to have conversations about that can be challenging. And so we just want to encourage you in the ways that are meaningful to you and in ways that are consistent with how your discipline or your field understands engagement, that you create those spaces, both for yourself and for your students. The other piece I wanted to share with you, for some of you may not be familiar with it, this is based on the work of John Saltmarsh and Matt Hartley, is that there's a growing movement in community engagement in higher education to talk about democratic civic engagement, and that there's certain attributes, elements of behavior and practice that you would associate with those activities. And those dimensions would include inclusiveness, active participation by community members. And so that wouldn't just be the heads of nonprofits necessarily, that would be people in the neighborhoods. That would be rethinking inclusiveness of how students participate in the process or how staff participate in the process, who contributes and identifies questions, who discusses methods, who can contribute to reflection, right? Who can assess learning, task sharing, lay participation, and this question about reciprocity, right? What are the questions that we're trying to answer? If it's a service learning course, you know, what's the goal of the service learning course and who's really being served in that relationship? Oftentimes we think it's the public that's being served, when the public as well is giving us a service, giving the university a service, i.e. they're hosting our students. They may be mentoring and providing guidance to our students and taking out of their daily work to do that. And so how are we structuring the learning environment to provide that kind of reflection for the students enrolled in our courses, if what you're teaching is a service learning course or a course that has a community-based learning component to it, or if it's in the conduct of a research project or something else. So that's another piece in which you could integrate this approach to kind of democratic civic engagement. And I think the biggest piece here is about valuing different approaches to knowledge, right? So I think the biggest piece of this has to do with how higher ed sees how we produce knowledge, right? So the traditional format is that higher ed produces an expert model of knowledge, i.e. knowledge exists in the academy, and in the academy we disseminate it out to the public, right? Who benefits from the knowledge that we create. And there is a benefit from that. There's many examples that we can find of that. However, in the context of community engaged scholarship, community engaged research, there's a recognition that there's specific knowledge that exists in neighborhoods. There's specific knowledge that lives in the daily lived experiences of people that can complement and enhance what the academic world can bring to knowledge. And so it's those two things that we want to harness and bring together. And that can be really, really challenging. Again, another piece of that counter-normative component to the work that we do. I think I've talked about that. So in that context of thinking about your mentoring role, right, we don't presume any particular model. We just ask you to identify and name it. And then that is framed within the context of the expectations of things that we need you to do in the program. So some of this is more administrative. That would include completing the letter of agreement, which is, you'll see at the end of today's session. Identifying your student scholars. We have a form for that. Historically, I know everyone's in a rush to try to get this information out. We have a very large program in excess of 100 students every year and more than 60 faculty. So emailing us the information actually is a way to slow down the process. There's just way more of you than there are of Amy and I. So there's a form, again, at the end of this presentation that you can access. We also need some additional pieces of information about your student scholars. There's a screening component that's really, really important here as well. This is a service-based scholarship program, and there are many service-based scholarship programs on campus. And what do I mean by that? A service-based scholarship program is one in which there's a set of expectations surrounding the fact that students have to contribute something in addition to just receiving the scholarship dollars, right? It's not like they apply, they get the scholarship, and they get the funds, right? So in this case, they have hours to contribute. One of the challenges that we know about many of our students these days is many of them have multiple commitments. They have as many conflicting priorities as we do. They're working jobs, they may be in caretaking roles, they may have multiple scholarships that include a service component, and they may be taking in excess of a full-time course load. And so the question for you in terms of what do you need to do to advance this project? What does the community need in terms of sustainability and making sure that someone's going to be covering whatever set of contributions the student's going to make? Is the student really in a place, or have they really thought about the implications of what taking this scholarship on? So part of that is making sure you communicate really clearly early on what your expectations are of the student, having conversations with the student about what their load is for the upcoming year, and are they going to be able to be at an X meeting in the evenings on Tuesday nights, or is it there in fact a course conflict that maybe you guys weren't able to talk about ahead of time? The earlier you have these conversations, the better off it will be for you, the student, and for whatever community partner that you're working with. And there's a question, Amy says.
How is the award period defined? If the SLAs are funded for the full year, is there reporting for both the fall and spring semesters, or just the end of the year?
So funding is tied to the mentor, right? Initially, so think about this. Remember, this scholarship program is designed around the faculty and staff member who applies. So you can switch students in and out. So, for example, Inga Randall is in the room with us. Inga, your award is for the academic year? For the academic year. So Inga has scholarship funds devoted to her for the academic year. She may identify one student to serve for the full academic year, or two different students, one to serve for the spring and one to serve for the fall. And so let me discuss reporting briefly on that. So if the student has a single semester award, whether it's fall or spring, right, their component of reporting will be tied to the semester that they have the scholarship, right? In the case of the mentor will have responsibilities, and we're going to preview that in a minute, for evaluating the student narrative at the time that the student completes it, But then the mentoring report, the mentor's report, is not due to the end of the academic year. Does that make sense? No matter what, the mentor report's not due to the end of the academic year. Student reporting is dependent upon what their semester of award is. The deadlines are posted on the website, and you can access them there. Did that answer the question for that person? Yes? Okay, awesome. We're going to talk a little bit more about reporting as we go through this. We talked about mentoring. The mentor report has two parts, right? Part one is evaluating the student narrative. Part two is completing a mentor report and survey that, again, is administered at the end of the year. There's a pseudo third part, and that has to do with the professional development reflection, and we'll talk about that. We can talk about that now. Well, actually, no, we'll talk about it in a minute. The other thing that we need you to be aware of is if the student falls out of compliance, i.e. they're not living up to your expectations for what they should be doing, please let us know. If you're having trouble reaching them, Amy and I can try to reach out to them and call them, right? If a student doesn't live up to the requirements for the scholarship, or if they don't live up to your requirements or expectations for how they should be interacting, we have a list of students that we've had to exclude from future scholarship awards. So we won't pull back in the middle of the year. We've been asked not to do that, but they would be ineligible for future awards. If the student has an academic year scholarship, but they fall out of compliance in the fall, we can withhold their spring scholarship. So that is one thing that we can do. It doesn't tend to happen often, but there have been a couple of cases where it's been warranted, and so we've honored the faculty's request to do that. So that is something that periodically comes up. The last piece of that, and this again is attached to the mentor report, is sharing assessment and outcomes data, as well as information on any presentations that you're giving associated with either your teaching, research, and scholarship, creative activity, and or service/partnership projects, right? More details are available on our website, and I'll talk a little bit about that more when we get into reporting. One thing I wanted to raise that doesn't apply to everyone, it does apply to some. In some cases, we have faculty and staff who apply for scholarship. They're in really, really busy roles, and the day-to-day interaction, supervision, and mentoring of the student scholar actually falls to someone else. That's perfectly reasonable. However, we need to know who that person is because we want them to understand what this program is about, and so that they can give good insight and feedback to the student as well. So if you need to distribute this mentoring role with someone else, please let us know so we can get them into the program and make sure that they get copies of the mentor letter of agreement. There are expectations that we have for co-mentors as well. But this is a great way to provide a wraparound experience for the student. One of the distinctive things about this program compared to other scholarship programs that are housed in the CSL is that we don't provide direct training to the students. That real interaction is between you, the mentor, and the student. So we're here in the background. The students don't develop a tight relationship with us. They develop those relationships with you and anyone else who's having regular contact with them. So the more common shared information we have, the better support we can give to the student. Any questions? Okay. So expectations for co-mentors. Like the lead mentor, we'd like them to complete orientation. They can complete it online just as many of you are doing. We also ask that they complete an evaluation of the student narrative, right? So they would complete the link that you would do as well. And they complete their own mentor and survey report, right? So their own reflections on this experience. The one thing we don't ask them to do that we ask the lead mentor would be the primary person who applied for the scholarship. We ask them to supply any assessment or outcomes data, right? So it just needs to come in through one person. Question? Okay, so here's the quiz. 2 steps you need to complete so that your student is set up to get their scholarship award. Any takers? Go, Starla. That's one. Complete the LOA, and there's one more. That's right. There's 3 things you need to do, one of which, if you're listening to this presentation or sitting in this room with me, you're already doing. You're at orientation. We ask mentors to complete orientation once per academic year. If you come in the fall and you apply for a summer scholarship, you do not need to come back and listen to this all over again in the summer, right? It's good for the full 3 semesters, so fall, spring, summer. Same thing for your students, same thing for your co-mentors. The mentor letter of agreement, again, it's built into completing orientation today, so you should be able to get that out of the way and identify your students, and you should be able to access that link. If when we get to the link, you get in there and you're like, oops, I didn't check this, I didn't check that, I'm not ready yet, you'll be able to access all of these links off the CSL website, so you won't have to go digging for them anymore. All right. If you have any questions about the Mentor LOA, please feel free to email Amy and I. I don't think I need to give any more explanation about it. It's long-winded, it restates much of what we're talking about here today, but it's a good reference point. When you submit your Mentor LOA, you get a copy of it so you can reference back expectations and all of that. So even if you don't want to come back to the website, you at least have the Mentor LOA to refer to. Again, I've already talked about the challenges we have if people email us or include. The other thing that happens a lot is prospective mentors identify a student and include them in their application. Because it's a competitive program, the other thing I want to raise everyone's awareness to, please don't promise a scholarship to any student prior to you getting award notification from the center. Our funding level is not increasing. The number of applications and levels of requests are increasing. We've actually had to deny people support this year. I'm expecting we're going to have to increase that as we go forward. So we don't want to have any kind of tension or conflict. So please don't promise a student a scholarship until you've got the award letter. And I think the other thing too is make sure you're screening the students to make sure they have the minimum GPA requirements and things that are needed for them to participate in this program. Those are all listed in your Mentor LOA. The one thing I will say that's not listed there is that the minimum GPA for this program is a 2.75 GPA. However, if there's a student who's on the cusp, right, maybe they're 2.5 or 2.25, but they're on the upkick, like i.e. they're really participating in class, it looks like their GPA is going to come up, and you feel like this experience would be really powerful for them and would benefit them, you can always submit a waiver and say, hey, I believe this is a good experience for the student, and we can bring them into the program on a trial basis. If their GPA stays stabilized, it doesn't go down, i.e. the program's not causing them hardship, they can continue in the program, right? So our only goal with that is that we don't want to, at the end of the day, we want students to be academically successful in all things, and so that's one of the reasons why we have that requirement. Things you'll need when you're identifying your students. So you need their first and last name. We also need their official IUPUI email address. That email address is really, really important this year. We've had to shift softwares for some of the things that we do. And one of the things that we need that email because they will only be able to access their student letter of agreement with that email. So whatever email you send us is the email they're going to need to supply to complete their letter of agreement. The other thing we're asking for this year, is this correct, Amy, is the 10-digit student ID, right? So when you are presented with the form at the end of this session, one of the things you'll be asked to provide is that 10-digit student ID, right? So we can, that actually facilitates the process of us moving the funds from our office over to the bursar's office. One other thing to add to your checklist of things I need to talk about with my prospective student scholars is one thing that we do not permit in the program is for a student to have multiple scholarship awards between multiple service learning assistant mentors. So you may want to talk to your student to see if they're working with another faculty or staff member on campus, and if they've already been engaged in awarded a service learning assistant scholarship. If you have a question about that, we can check our records, but our records are only going to be current if the other mentor has completed that identify your student form, right? Things that the students need to do. So just like you, the students have an electronic letter of agreement to complete. They too are expected to complete the student iteration of orientation. And then they have these professional development activities to complete, and we're going to spend some time talking about that in just a minute. And then their end of award period report. Again, students fall only, they would submit their report at the end of the fall. Students spring only, they submit their report at the end of the spring. If they're academic year, they submit one report at the end of the academic year, right? So what is the professional development requirement? We talked about the mentoring piece and all of that already, right? The activity selection is not done by the CSL. Sometimes it's one thing if a student is contacting the CSL and saying, hey, I'm looking for ideas. My mentor and I talked and we couldn't think of anything. We have a resource for all of you for that. But again, this is part of that relationship building component. We counsel the students to come and think about how do they want to build their capacity? What pieces of this project are they really excited about? What skill sets maybe they think they need to refine or they want to advance? And we ask them to come and talk to you and have those conversations. And in those conversations, identify meaningful activities. The last thing we want to see is students showing up to workshops sponsored through the CSL, and they have no idea why they're there, and they really are not interested in the content. That is the worst possible scenario, right? And believe me, unfortunately, that's happened a few times, and that's not the purpose of that requirement. The requirement is to enhance the quality of their contribution to your teaching, to the partnership project, to the research or scholarly activity, right? And so this is, again, how do you make this a meaningful experience? Yes, Starla? No, it does not. No, it does not have to be a campus-sponsored activity. It doesn't necessarily have to, it could be a range of things. I'll show you a list of what some of them could be, but it's out of the box. Each of your projects that are funded through this program are very, very unique. And it's the details, it's the context of the project and where the students are that should guide those activities. And only you, the two of you, are best placed to make those decisions. We won't say no to anything. Yes, go ahead, Amy.
Let's say I select a scholarship recipient that also would like to work for us for an additional 10 hours per week or work as a research assistant for another center. Is that allowed?
In the context of this scholarship program, they don't work, they contribute to your to your project, but your question's well positioned. That's up to you. Right now, there's nothing we can do to prohibit a student from having commitments to multiple units on campus. I think the one thing I would counsel any mentor on that is just having that conversation, an honest, open conversation with the student of where are they? Are they going to be able to balance all the commitments? Do they really understand what's being asked of them in terms of time commitment, in terms of getting to and from different places? If they're on the west side of town for X number of hours and on the east side of town for X number of hours, and then they have commitments downtown, are they going to be able to do that? I think that's one piece of it. Go ahead.
There was a separate question regarding something different.
Okay, let me finish this one. And so I think that's one piece of it. If the question is about a graduate student scholarship, and I don't know if it is, if it's about a graduate student having multiple commitments, that gets more complicated, only because the issue around graduate insurance and who's going to cover graduate insurance should they need it comes into play. And so that's why probably many of you saw one thing, there was another column added on to the reward report this year that was about graduate student insurance. If you have a question about, is this going to impact my unit, is this going to impact their scholarship because it's tied to a graduate award, I would just encourage you to call us or email us, because we're having to handle each of those on a case-by-case basis. Hopefully I answered that question.
There was another question asking Starla to repeat hers into the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
My question was, do the professional development opportunities have to be sponsored by campus?
Yes.
Campus space of it.
Sorry, that was my bad. I should have repeated the question. Thank you for whoever asked that. No, they do not. Now, in prior years, students usually have been asked to submit a reflection about their professional development activity, right? I mean, again, because we're trying to support learning through the context of the program. And so you can do the activity, but it's usually in analyzing, reflecting on the activity that can be most beneficial. This year, we will not ask the students to submit that to us. There will be a component in the mentor report where we ask you, how did you guys handle that? Between you and them, did you decide we didn't want to do a written narrative for the professional development reflection? We opted to discuss it orally, and that because that was tied to your model of mentoring, right? So a lot of this is going to be about what decisions you, the mentor, make about how you want to handle and use those professional development activities. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
For the professional development, if there are orientations or workshops or conferences that the students can go to, is there a allotted amount of funds for that?
The SLA program doesn't have funds for that. I would encourage each of you, if that's something that's really important, to send a message to Julie Hatcher, the Executive Director for the Center for Service and Learning. I think the center is trying to rethink a number of things, and if there's a desire for a pool of funds to be dedicated to support student travel to conferences, I think it's a fantastic idea. Right now, we don't actually have one. There might be possibilities of accessing funds potentially through the Center for Research and Learning, and then there might be also opportunities through the Office of Student Affairs or Student Activities, but I don't have details on that. However, Amy, I'm going to put Amy on the spot. Amy, let's add that to the list of things we can try to research and make available to both the mentors and the student scholars. So we'll inquire more about that. That was a great question. Right. So again, the students aren't going to be required to submit a narrative reflection on their professional development activities. The expectation is if you have a one-semester scholarship award, you do one activity. Two-semester scholarship, i.e. the academic year scholarship, you would do 2 professional development activities. You can front-end load them both into the fall semester, back load them both into the spring semester. That's, again, entirely between you and your student scholar. How they reflect on it is up to you and your student scholar. At the end, when you complete your mentor report, if you opt to have them engage in a written reflection, we would ask you to submit that as part of your mentor report. If you opted and you do it as oral, then there will be a question on there asking you a little bit about that, and that's it. Any questions about that? Again, off the CSL website, off the SLA component of the CSL website, there's actually a page focused on professional development. If you want to bookmark it, or if you just Google Professional Development Service Learning Assistance, once you get to the CSL website, there's a set of accordion links. So it could be that they attend a workshop or complete an online module. They may attend or present at a conference, right? They could complete a literature review. They might give a presentation to a community group or on campus. They could apply for a grant, right? They could take on a leadership role, i.e., they're leading a group of students as peer mentors, right, in a particular project. They could contribute or be a co-author on an article, whether that's to a blog site, whether that's to a community newsletter, whether that's to an academic journal, whether that's to an undergraduate student journal. That's the conversation for you guys to have. We're not going to prejudge something as not qualifying. If you have other ideas about what things might qualify, let us know. We'll add them to the list. There's more than, if you click on any of these links on the website, it expands out and gives you examples, right? So we're wanting to create a really diverse pool here. And so if there's things you see missing that you really think should be added, please do let us know. Can everybody see the link well enough? Those of you piping in? Okay. We'll post this presentation on the actual live presentation will be there, but I think I'll put an archived copy of the PowerPoint there as well, just so you can flip through the slides. Important institutional information, just a reminder, we're in year 2 now of the IU programs with children and the liability policy. SLA student scholars, they are checked against the National Sex Offender Registry, but because, again, the CSL does not have oversight for each of the various projects and initiatives that are supported with SLA scholarship dollars, the mentors bear the responsibility of working within their school guidelines about which programs, which projects need to be have the students go through a background check, right? Again, you are at the center of this. You know better than we do, so we don't presume, and we don't want to add additional costs for you or for the students. If you don't know how to access any of the information about this, or you haven't heard about the buzz around the IU policy for programs involving children, the relevant links are listed here. There's plenty of policy information. One thing I think important to note is if you happen to be a mentor who is teaching, who is funded, who is teaching a service learning class, and that service learning course that you've designed will be tutoring children or will be going out into the schools. In some cases, things to know. One is that IPS and many of the school districts have their own forms, their own background checks that you have to navigate, right? The university has been working with IPS to try to sort through which they will accept and which they won't accept. I would invite you to contact my colleague Morgan Studer, S-T-U-D-E-R, in our center. She's our program director of community outreach if you have questions about that. The other piece is there's been an exception to policy made for faculty teaching service learning courses. The idea behind the IU policy for programs involving children is not to interfere with the teaching and learning mission. They just want to make sure that they're creating a safe environment and not exposing children under the age of 18 to risk. And so if you're teaching a service learning class, you can get a waiver where you don't have to have a background check for every single student related to every single project. Again, the policy is available if you contact Morgan Studer. You can also access it through the IU Office of Public Safety. That information is online now too. Questions about that? Things to remember, this is a scholarship program, so students, scholars don't earn hourly wages. They're not paid employees of the university, nor are they agents of the university. They are, however, representatives of the university, right? So if you're a paid employee, there's different stipulations, different issues that come up if you're actually official paid employee. There are students who are engaged in programs that are kind of in this gray zone of, are they legally an agent of the institution? That's something to kind of examine within your department or school. But for the purposes of the program, the only thing we would ask you to remind them is that when they go out on behalf of the university, they are representing the university. So, and it's important too to remind them, because sometimes they forget when they may forget when they're working out in a community, attending a community meeting, or engaging in X-service project. They may not remember that the activities they do reflect not only on themselves, they reflect on you as the mentor, and they ultimately reflect on the university. And our goal here is, again, to develop positive relationships with the community. Again, a couple reminders about how the money flows out. So once you attend orientation, complete your letter of agreement, identify your students, we have to transfer that information and we issue a letter of agreement to the student. The student completes the letter of agreement, they submit it. If they attend orientation and it completed officially, there is a reflection component at student orientation that they have to complete. Once both of you have done those steps, we can then release the funds and send it over to the bursar's office. What happens once it gets to the bursar's office, right? When we release it to the time the bursar may distribute it, often takes about 2 weeks, right? The steps before that, i.e. you completing orientation, letter of agreement, them doing that can vary significantly. We're trying to shorten that time frame. But once the money gets to their bursar account, if they do not have a balance, the money is direct deposited into an account that they've identified, and it'll be refunded to them. Because the disbursement times vary, another conversation to have with your student is they need to go ahead and make payments on their bursar account now. If they owe a balance and they're waiting on a scholarship through this program, encourage them not to wait. Encourage them to keep paying on their balance, right? The last thing we want is late fees and things to be, the students to experience those late fees. But again, there is a time delay depending upon when orientation and all of these different steps get completed. So if you can just make sure and remind them of that, that can be helpful. We do communicate this information to students at orientation, but the more we can kind of close the loop, the better it is for them. Mentor reporting. Any questions before we move on to mentor reporting? Again, and actually this is a screenshot of a portion of the SLA site. I'm actually going to go out to it now. So this was the URL that I gave you at the beginning of our session today. It's not easy to read probably off the screen. But what I'm going to do is go here to a link called Mentor Program Components. Under Mentor Program Components, everything you need is here in terms of things you need to complete. So information on expectations, all of that. If you're trying to register for Mentor Orientation, you click here, and it will take you to the Mentor Orientation page at which you can find the Mentor Letter of Agreement link and the Identify Your Student Scholar link after today's presentation, right? So if you don't get to complete it here today and you want to come back to it, you can access it here. If I go back, student narrative evaluations, that's the first thing you'll do in terms of reporting as the mentor, is evaluating your students. The due dates for student scholars and for evaluation are posted here, as are the instructions for what you need to do to evaluate. And that includes the questions that they're prompted with. For the final report, the students have a set of questions they're asked to respond to. They're here, as well as rubrics that you can use to evaluate them, and the actual link to the form to submit your evaluation. And one thing Amy will do over the course of the year is we get closer to key deadlines, we'll send out reminder emails to you. And again, once we get that RSS feed function working, some of this will be automated. The final piece, is there any questions about that? I'm assuming that if I try to go into too much detail here, no one's going to remember it. So I figure you'll go back at your leisure, yes? Right? The mentor report and survey, again, the mentor report and survey, regardless of you as the mentor, what your award was for, you don't complete this until May of 2015, right? So you have all academic year, right? The due date is on or before May 15th. With all of our deadlines, we recognize that you are busy and that your students are busy, and we try to be flexible. The deadlines are there as guidelines. We like to have everything done by that time, but if you have challenges, there are other things going on, you just can't get to it and you need an extension, we're happy to accommodate that. One thing we have been cracking down a bit on, and again, it's because funding is competitive and we have increasing requests, is we don't like to go from one academic year to the next with no reporting submitted. So if you are a mentor and you may have gotten one of these award letters that said approved pending, and that approved pending may be because there was a missing recommendation letter or because reporting for 2013-14 hadn't been completed, we can't move forward with processing the scholarship until reporting is submitted. That's the only kind of stipulation. But within that, we're happy to be flexible and work with you on getting the reports completed, right? So again, if you click that requirement number 3 link, due dates are listed, access to tips for reporting. We're also going to provide some additional information about assessment, both learning assessment from the student perspective or program evaluation and outcomes assessment around the partnership or the research project. That information will be housed here as well. Is there a question? So one-stop shop. If you're funded through the program, we ask that you provide some level of documentation of what's happened in the program. Now, we're not asking you to make up stuff for the purposes of sending stuff in. We want it to be tied to the things you have in progress right now. We recognize that whether it's a course, whether it's a research or scholarly project or a partnership project or a service project, things evolve over time. If you're at the front end of the project, you may just be trying to identify goals. You're not going to have outcomes or maybe even necessarily a lot of outputs information to share with us. That's fine. There's a segment of the mentor report where you're just asked to kind of describe, what's happened over the year and where are you. You're invited to share outcomes information. We encourage you, if you have a logic model or some other sort of program planning documents that you want to share with us, to do so. If you're collecting student learning outcomes data, did you use a rubric? Could you provide us a copy of the rubric? Could you provide us some sample student responses? You know, strong, average, weak, however, whatever your coding system is. Or did you use a quantitative instrument to assess student outcomes? Perhaps the assessment that you used was what's the end of course survey that's provided through your school or department. What is your practice? We are just looking to understand how you're assessing student learning as it relates to as it is played out in the context of service learning, or how you're attending to outcomes evaluation in the context of other types of community engaged projects. And in terms of evaluating, that could be the partnership itself, and that's something that we have resources in the center to support you with as well. More details are available on the website about that. If you have questions at any time, please, now is the best time to ask if you're wanting to put something into place. But again, you're not going to be penalized for not having something into place. We're looking to try to understand and communicate up to the institution what the challenges, what the opportunities, and what are the really great things that are going on. And so outcomes evaluation data, that sort of information, student learning outcomes assessment, all of that is really helpful. And that can actually help us leverage the requests we put up to the administration to add further support to this scholarship program so that we can make it accessible to you. I'm going to skip through these. One thing you may want to consider is that off our website we have program funding priorities. You may want to take a look at those. Some of those align very well with the strategic plan, and if you're trying to position, again, you may have other projects going on that you're trying to position your work, whether it's in teaching or another domain, with the campus's strategic priorities. This may help you as well. So it's a reference document. And again, also as you're thinking about renewing an application, just familiarizing yourself with our program priorities can be helpful. And I'm going to skip over those. Things that we're going to be adding to the website is some of us come to this work and have experience doing program evaluation, and some of us don't. Some of us come to it having lots of experience in doing student learning outcomes assessment. Some of us don't. This is all an opportunity for us to kind of stretch our limbs a bit over time. So what we're going to be doing over the course of this year is beefing up some of our resources. The Kellogg Foundation, the Bruner Foundation, NSF, a number of nonprofits and governmental organizations have great resource guides to help practitioners as they're trying to get in on actually engaging in program planning. It can be really, really helpful for course design, believe it or not, as much as it is for doing work in and with the community. So we're going to be putting those up online, and we're hoping to bring in a couple of outside speakers this year to actually work with faculty and staff and community partners on program planning and evaluation. So those are forthcoming. If you want to work with someone in the CSL around learning and partnership assessment, Kristen Norris and Tom Hahn are colleagues in the center. If you want to work with them around the civic-minded graduate or the civic-minded professional model, particularly in the areas of quantitative analysis, they're really, really great contacts. Kristen also does a lot with digital storytelling. I recommend talking with her. If you're interested in integrative and applied learning at the undergraduate or the graduate level, intercultural learning, that's more of my domain, as well as doing partnership mapping and evaluation, actually with someone who's in the audience, my friend and colleague Starla Officer, who I'll wave to her. You can't wave back. And then also we're doing a lot more with network analysis to look at partnership relations. So if those are facets that you want to look at, or you're interested in doing strategic planning around partnerships, and particularly campus community partnerships, please don't hesitate to contact us in the center. We can point you to resources, i.e. literature and tools, or we can sit down and work with you and be a listening and sounding board. A couple final reminders. Student Scholar Orientation is now scheduled. We're going to be doing a similar thing. It'll be a live session, but we'll be recording it with the help of our wonderful colleagues from University College, who are using live stream to help us out here. The student session will be scheduled for August 28th, which is a Thursday, from 1 to 2:30 in Taylor Hall, that used to be called University College, Taylor Hall 104. We'll record it. It'll also be up online on the SLA website. Just how we went in, there was a mentor program component section to the website. So too is there one for students. I'll quickly show that to you. So this is the mentor link. This is the student program link. So similar for as it was for you, they can scroll down and access all their components right here. Yes.
How long do we have to identify students?
That's a good question. You're limited mostly by the financial aid office. There's a cutoff time in late September during which we need to have submitted information. So by the end of September, if you're struggling for the fall, it's starting to get pretty late. If you have an academic year award as a mentor and something just falls apart in the fall and you can't find someone or it just doesn't work out, two things. You can always send us an email. We can send information out through the listserv to see if there are other members of our faculty and staff community who might know of students who might be good for your project, but I would say do it in early September, not late. Secondly, if something just doesn't work out for the fall, it doesn't mean that you have to give back your entire academic year award. You could still go forward with the spring portion of the scholarship. Does that help? All right. One last thing we ask you to do is we want to make people aware of how the CSL is supporting you and your community engaged work. So if you are making a presentation or you and your scholars are out in the community, if you could reference the support of the program, if you want our logo, we're happy to supply that. But that helps us help you. Again, the more recognition that the CSL gets around this program, that it's actually being used, the more that we can, and we had outcomes for it, the more we can leverage resources. And that's our goal. We really want to be able to fund as many faculty and staff as possible. It's good for students, and we hope that it's good for the community. Okay, last steps. You are ready. You are ready, Freddies. You can go online right now. We're at the end of orientation. Feel free to go online. We have about 15 minutes, am I correct? We have about 15 minutes left. If you want, you can go in, access the mentor letter of agreement, and the identify your student scholar form, right? All you have to do, go back to the mentor orientation page if you have your computer with you. My browser's been upgraded. I feel privileged. Right, so go on to the CSL site, to the SLA site. If you're from the home page, I'll walk you through it. I hate walking you through it, but I will. Right, so we're at the CSL homepage. Go under Financial Support, Awards, and Professional Development. Scroll down to Faculty, Staff, Programs. Right, if you go directly to the link I gave you at the beginning of the presentation, it's a lot easier. Service Learning Assistant Scholarship Program. And then you can click on Mentor Program component. Mentor Orientation. Click on that one again and scroll down to the bottom of that page and you should see the link. Amy, did you correct those links? So, mentor letter of agreements right here. Has everyone been able to get to that page? And again, these are here at any time. If you have time and you want to do them now, please feel free to do so. Are there any questions? Would you like us to stay online while you go into some of this in case there's additional questions, or is everybody ready to work independently? The folks in-house are ready to work independently. How about those of you who are tuning in remotely. No comment. All right. I think we're done for today then. If you have any questions or if you have any difficulty accessing the links after we close out, please go ahead and call Amy and I this afternoon. We'll be in the office. Thank you for tuning in with us, and we look forward to a wonderful year. Thank you.